My name is Valerie Vance. I was 34 years old, standing in a fitted Vera Wang gown in the private bridal suite of the Meridian Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago, when my phone buzzed against the marble vanity at exactly 4:47 p.m. on June 14. I almost didn't check it. My hairstylist, Renata, was still pinning the last strand of my chignon, and my mother was fussing with the hem of my dress, telling me I looked like something out of a magazine. But the screen lit up twice in a row, and something in my gut told me to look. Piers Sterling, you're fired. Consider it my gift. Congrats on the wedding, by the way. I read it 3 times before the words actually landed. Then I read it a 4th time, because I was certain, absolutely certain, that I had misunderstood something. I hadn't. Valerie, my mother said. You've gone pale. What is it? I didn't answer her. I set the phone face down on the vanity like it had burned my palm, and I forced a smile that felt like plaster cracking on my face. Nothing. Work stuff. I'll deal with it after. But I couldn't stop my hands from shaking as Renata finished the last pin. Here's what you need to understand about me before I tell you what happened next. I am not the kind of woman who cries at inconvenient moments. I built my entire career on being the person who doesn't flinch, the one who walks into a boardroom full of men twice my age holding a spreadsheet like a weapon. For 11 years, I had given everything I had to the Obsidian Crown, a luxury hotel empire with 43 properties spanning New York, Miami, Los Angeles, and Dubai. I started as a junior operations analyst making $52,000 a year in a cramped cubicle on the 14th floor of their Chicago headquarters. By the time I turned 32, I was the head of global operations, overseeing a $2.3 billion annual revenue stream, and reporting directly to the founder himself, Arthur Sterling. Arthur built that company from a single boutique hotel in Aspen in 1987. By the time I came along, it was a machine, beautiful on the surface but bleeding money in the background because of outdated booking systems, manual pricing errors, and inefficient staffing models across every property. I spent 3 years, nights, weekends, missed birthdays, designing a proprietary automated pricing and booking architecture that increased profit margins across the entire portfolio by 40%. I called it Vantage. Arthur called it the reason I sleep at night. I trusted him. He trusted me. For a long time, that was enough. Then, 8 months before my wedding, Arthur announced he was stepping back from daily operations to focus on his health, and he installed his 31-year-old son, Piers Sterling, as executive director over the operations division. Over me. I want to be fair here because fairness matters even now. Piers wasn't stupid. He had an MBA from a decent school and a talent for talking about synergy and disruption in board meetings while contributing almost nothing of substance. But he had never built anything. He had never sat in a hotel basement at 2 a.m. debugging a reservation system, while a general manager screamed at him because 300 guests had no rooms. He had inherited the confidence of a builder without ever laying a single brick. From the moment he took the role, Piers treated me like competition instead of an asset. He questioned my decisions in front of junior staff. He rerouted credit for the automated pricing system to himself in a shareholder newsletter, calling it my vision for the future of Obsidian Crown. I let it go. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that Arthur would eventually see through it, that my work would speak for itself the way it always had. I was wrong about a lot of things that year. That was the first one. The second thing I was wrong about was Piers's ego. I had assumed there was a ceiling to how far his pettiness would go. I found out on my wedding day that there wasn't one. By the time the ceremony started at 6 p.m. in the hotel's Rose Garden courtyard, I had pushed the text message down into some locked compartment in my chest. My father walked me down the aisle. String quartet, 70 guests, string lights threading through the trellises. I looked at Julian standing at the altar in his charcoal suit, and for about 4 minutes, Piers Sterling did not exist. Julian Vance was not a man who talked about his job much. When people asked what he did, he'd say something vague like, "I work with the Treasury Department," and change the subject. I'd been with him for 2 years before I fully understood that forensic auditor meant he spent his days untangling financial crimes that most people never even knew existed, shell companies, laundering schemes, falsified ledgers hidden inside legitimate businesses. He was quiet, precise, and he noticed things. Small things. The kind of things most people walked past without a second glance. During the reception, after the toasts, after the first dance, Julian pulled me aside near the champagne table. His face had that stillness I'd learned to recognize, the look he got when he was about to say something he'd been sitting on for a while. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly, his hand wrapped around mine. "And I need you to not react. Not here. Julian, you're scaring me. I've been assigned to a federal case for the past 6 months." He glanced over my shoulder, checking that Northwest 1 was close enough to hear. "Valerie, it's Obsidian Crown. It's Pierce." I felt the floor tilt slightly under my heels. "What are you talking about?" "Offshore accounts. 3 shell entities registered in the Caymans, routing funds out of the legacy maintenance and renovation budgets. We're talking somewhere north of $11 million over the last 2 years, based on what we've traced so far." He paused. "I wasn't allowed to tell you until the case reached a certain phase. I'm telling you now because of what happened this afternoon. Because I think it's about to accelerate, and you need to be ready." I stared at him. Somewhere behind us, someone laughed loudly at a joke I couldn't hear. The band kept playing. And I stood there in my wedding dress, holding a glass of champagne I no longer wanted, absorbing the fact that the man who had just fired me by text message was under federal investigation for fraud, and had been, this entire time, while lecturing me in meetings about fiscal responsibility. "Does Arthur know?" I asked. "Not yet. Not the extent of it." Julian's jaw tightened. "But Valerie, there's something else. Something you need to think about tonight, not tomorrow." "What?" "When Pierce cut your access this afternoon, did IT process it through the standard offboarding protocol? Full deactivation, credential transfer, the works." I actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "Julian, he sent me a text. During my own wedding. There was no protocol. There wasn't even an email from HR." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close to it. Like a man watching a door he didn't know existed swing quietly open. "Then nobody has administrator access to Vantage right now," he said. "Because you built it so that only a certified handover, signed off by 2 authorized senior officers, logged and confirmed in the core system, releases the failsafe. Am I right?" I hadn't thought about it. Not once, not through the shock of the message, not through the ceremony, not through any of it. But he was right. 3 years earlier, during the system's final build phase, I had installed a contingency protocol that almost no one at Obsidian Crown even remembered existed, a safeguard against exactly the kind of reckless, careless decision-making I'd just watched Pierce make. If the primary administrator account was ever deactivated without following the exact handover sequence, Vantage would lock itself down. Pricing, reservations, vendor payments, payroll disbursement schedules across all 43 properties frozen. Not deleted. Not sabotaged. Just paused, waiting for a protocol that only I knew how to complete. I had built it as an insurance policy. I never imagined I'd need to use it on my own wedding night. "Julian," I said slowly, my heart pounding somewhere behind my ribs, "how bad is this going to get for them?" He looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time all evening, I saw something almost gentle behind the seriousness in his eyes, like he understood exactly what I was about to lose and exactly what I was about to gain, and he wasn't going to pretend it was simple. "Bad enough," he said, "that by this time next year, neither of them is going to recognize the company they think they still own." I didn't sleep that night. Somewhere around 2 a.m., still in the hotel suite, still technically on my honeymoon before it had even started, I opened my laptop and logged into a personal cloud drive that had nothing to do with Obsidian Crown servers, a private backup I kept out of habit, the kind of quiet precaution you build after 11 years of watching how quickly people in power rewrite the truth when it benefits them. Inside were 3 years of system architecture documents, deployment logs, and administrative records, all time-stamped, all with my name on them as the sole certified engineer of record. I closed the laptop and looked over at Julian, asleep beside me, his phone still lit up on the nightstand with an email preview I could just barely read in the dark. Sterling case, escalation authorization requested. I didn't know yet exactly what the next 12 months were going to look like. I didn't know about the board meetings that hadn't happened yet, the banks that hadn't called in their loans yet, the reporters who hadn't started asking questions yet. I didn't know that in exactly 1 year, I would be the one sitting across a boardroom table from Arthur Sterling, not as an employee begging for her job back, but as the person holding the paperwork to his entire empire. All I knew that night was this: Piers Sterling thought he had ended something. He had no idea he'd just started the only thing in his life he'd never be able to undo. The first sign that something was wrong at Obsidian Crown came at 7:14 a.m. the next morning, while I was still technically supposed to be on a plane to Santa Barbara for my honeymoon. Julian's phone rang first. Then mine. Then his again. I watched him step onto the hotel balcony in his robe, phone pressed to his ear, his voice dropping into that flat, controlled register he used when something serious was happening, and he didn't want to alarm anyone standing nearby. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. I already knew, in the pit of my stomach, exactly what had triggered the calls. Vantage had locked. By 9 a.m., I finally turned my own phone back on after ignoring it since the wedding. 41 missed calls. 6 voicemails. The first was from Denise Okafor, the general manager of the Chicago flagship property, her voice tight with barely restrained panic. Valerie, I don't know what's going on, but nobody can access reservations, nobody can process check-ins, the payment terminals are down at every front desk in the building, and corporate isn't answering. I know it's your wedding week, I'm so sorry to call, but I don't know who else to reach. The second voicemail was from someone in IT, a young guy named Marcus who I'd hired 2 years earlier, his voice shaking. Ms. Vance, I think this might be related to the access change yesterday. The system's asking for a dual certification handover code, and nobody here has it. I looked through every document we have and your name is the only one listed as primary architect. I don't know what to do. The third voicemail was Piers. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and listened to it twice. Valerie, it's Piers. Look, whatever this is, it needs to get fixed today. I don't know what kind of games you're playing, but this isn't funny. We have 3 properties completely unable to process bookings, and the Miami property has 400 guests checking in this afternoon, with no way to confirm reservations. Call me back immediately. Games. That was the word he used. As if I had woken up the morning after my wedding and decided, out of spite, to sabotage a multi-billion-dollar hotel chain. As if a text message that fired me during my own reception hadn't set every one of those dominoes in motion the second he hit send. I felt something in my chest that I want to be honest about, because this story only works if I'm honest. It wasn't triumph. Not yet. It was something closer to disbelief, the particular disbelief of watching a person confirm, in real time, that they have learned absolutely nothing. I didn't call him back. Instead, I called our family attorney, a sharp, unbothered woman named Carol Whitfield who had drafted my employment contract 7 years earlier, and had reviewed the Vantage licensing agreement personally before I ever wrote a line of code. Carol had one rule she'd repeated to me more than once over the years: never explain yourself to someone who fired you. Let their lawyer call mine. Valerie, Carol said, once I'd explained everything, walk me through the termination. Exactly how it happened. A text message. During my wedding reception. No email, no HR notification, no exit meeting, nothing in writing beyond that. There was a pause on the line, and I could hear her typing. Do you still have the message? Screenshotted it before I even finished reading it the first time. Good instinct. Another pause. Valerie, under the terms of your employment contract, the one I personally negotiated for you, might I add, termination requires written notice through HR with a minimum 10 business day transition period for any employee holding administrator-level access to proprietary systems you built and own the intellectual property rights to. A text message doesn't meet that bar. Not even close. Which means, legally speaking, you haven't actually been terminated. Not in any way that would hold up if this ever needed to be examined by a court. I sat with that for a moment, looking out at the Pacific through the balcony doors, Julian still on his call somewhere outside, his voice low and even. So what happens now? I asked. Now, Carol said, and I could hear the faint edge of a smile in her voice, we let them come to us. They came to us by 11 a.m., though not in the way I expected. Arthur Sterling called me himself. I almost didn't pick up. In 11 years, Arthur had called my personal cell maybe 4 times, always for something significant enough to bypass the usual chain of communication. Hearing his name on my screen sent a strange jolt through me, not fear exactly, but the muscle memory of respect I'd built for a man I'd once considered something close to a mentor. Valerie. His voice sounded older than I remembered, rougher around the edges. I need you to tell me what's happening with the system. With respect, Arthur, I was fired yesterday. By text message. During my wedding. A long silence. I didn't know about that until 40 minutes ago. I believed him. That was the strange, complicated part of the whole thing. I actually believed that Arthur Sterling, a man sharp enough to build a billion-dollar empire from a single Aspen hotel, had genuinely not known what his son did until the entire company's financial backbone seized up around him. Pierce sent it without consulting HR, without consulting legal, without consulting me, Arthur continued. I want to fix this. Today. I want you back in that building this afternoon. Arthur, I appreciate that. I do. But I'm not walking back into a building where the man who terminated me by text message is still my direct supervisor, expecting me to just quietly restore access like nothing happened. That's not how this works. Not anymore. What do you want? I hadn't planned this conversation. I want to be clear about that, because there's a version of this story where I'd spent months plotting the perfect response, and that isn't what happened. What happened was that I'd spent 11 years learning exactly how negotiations worked inside the company, and 11 years learning exactly what Arthur Sterling valued most, control, and the appearance of control. I wanted in writing, through legal counsel, that my termination was invalid and rescinded, I said. I want a formal, board-documented statement that Pierce Sterling does not have unilateral authority over operations decisions involving proprietary systems. And I want 48 hours before I even consider walking back into that building, because right now, Arthur, I don't trust that I'd be walking back into the same company I left 2 days ago. There was a pause so long I thought the call had dropped. 48 hours, Arthur finally said. But Valerie, every hour this system stays down costs us an estimated $600,000 across the portfolio. Bookings, cancellations, guest compensation, reputational damage. I need you to understand the stakes here. I understand the stakes, I said. I built the system that made you that money in the first place. I hung up before he could respond, and for the first time since the wedding, I let myself smile. That night, Julian came back from a call that had taken him out of the hotel entirely. He wouldn't tell me exactly where, only that it was case-related, and sat across from me at the small table in our suite, 2 room service plates going cold between us. There's something you should know before this gets bigger, he said. The case isn't just Pierce anymore. I set down my fork. What do you mean? When we started pulling the thread on the offshore accounts 8 months ago, it was supposed to be narrow, Pierce, individually, misusing discretionary funds. But forensic accounting doesn't stay narrow. Not when the money's been moving for 2 years. He pulled his phone out, hesitated, then turned it toward me. A document preview, heavily redacted, but I could see enough. Wire transfer records. Dates. A pattern of transfers from the legacy maintenance and renovation budget, the the same budget that, 3 years ago, I had personally flagged in an internal memo as chronically underfunded compared to what the properties actually needed. I remembered that memo. I remembered Arthur's response to it, a curt note saying the budget was being handled appropriately at the executive level. "Julian," I said slowly, "are you telling me Arthur knew?" He didn't answer right away, and that silence told me more than any words could have. "I'm telling you," he said finally, "that the investigation isn't finished. And I'm telling you that whatever happens next, you need to be very careful about how much trust you extend to that man, no matter how kindly he speaks to you on the phone." I thought about Arthur's voice that morning, worried, apologetic, almost paternal. I thought about 11 years of trusting him blindly, the way he'd trusted me. And I thought about the fact that somewhere in a locked drawer inside my own quiet, careful mind, I had just started keeping score. 2 days later, Carol Whitfield forwarded me a formal letter from Obsidian Crown's legal department, rescinding my termination and confirming, in writing, that no employee held unilateral authority over proprietary operational systems without board-level sign-off. I read it twice. Then I opened my laptop, and for the first time in 3 days, I began drafting the certified handover protocol that would bring Vantage back online. But I didn't submit it yet. Because that same afternoon, an email landed in my personal inbox from an address I didn't recognize, a Gmail account with no name attached, just a string of numbers. The subject line contained 4 words that stopped me cold in the middle of the hotel lobby, coffee halfway to my mouth. "You need to see this." Attached was a single PDF, 3 pages of internal correspondence between Piers Sterling and a name I had never seen before in 11 years at that company, a name that, within the hour, Julian would confirm was tied directly to one of the shell entities in the Caymans. I forwarded it to Julian without a word. His reply came back in less than a minute. "Don't submit the handover protocol yet. Call me now." I called Julian from a stairwell off the hotel lobby, because it was the only place quiet enough to hear him properly. "Who sent that email?" I asked before he could say anything. "I don't know yet. Could be someone inside the company. Could be someone trying to manipulate you into acting early before we're ready. I need you to sit on it. Don't respond to the sender, don't forward it to anyone else, and don't submit that handover protocol until I tell you it's safe. Julian, Denise called me twice this morning. The Miami property turned away 31 guests yesterday because the system's still down. I'm the one holding that up now, not Piers. I know." His voice softened but only slightly. "And I need 48 more hours. I promise you, Valerie, this is the part where patience is worth more than speed." I hated how right he turned out to be. The name in that PDF was Corbin Ash. On paper, Corbin Ash was a strategic consultant, who had been paid $340,000 over 18 months by a company called Meridian Point Advisory LLC, a name so deliberately generic it barely registered as suspicious unless you already knew what you were looking for. Meridian Point had a Delaware registration, a P.O. box for an address, and according to the 3 pages of email correspondence, a very close working relationship with Piers. The emails weren't damning on their own. That was the frustrating part. Piers was careful in writing, careful the way people are when they've watched enough television to think they understand how investigations work. But there was one line, buried in an email dated 14 months earlier, that Julian read out loud to me over the phone that night with a kind of quiet, focused intensity I'd never heard from him before. "Keep the renovation allocations flexible on paper. Corporate doesn't need line item detail as long as the totals reconcile at year-end." "That's not proof of theft by itself," Julian said. "But it's proof of intent to obscure. Combined with what we already have on the wire transfers, it starts building a much cleaner picture." "A picture of what, exactly?" "That Piers wasn't just skimming discretionary funds for personal use. He was systematically underfunding real maintenance and safety work across multiple properties, and diverting the difference." Julian paused. "Valerie, do you remember the elevator incident at the Miami property? 11 months ago. I remembered it instantly, a cold drop in my stomach. A guest had been trapped for 40 minutes in a service elevator with faulty maintenance records. Corporate had quietly settled with the family and called it an isolated mechanical failure. That inspection report showed the elevator hadn't been serviced in 14 months, I said slowly. I flagged it. I remember flagging it. You did. It's in the files. And the renovation budget line for elevator maintenance at that property was fully allocated on paper that year. Fully spent, according to the official ledger. Julian let that sit for a moment. Except it wasn't. Not really. I sat down on the stairwell step, the phone pressed hard against my ear, and felt something shift inside me that had nothing to do with my career, or my termination, or even the money. This wasn't about an insecure man resenting a woman more competent than him anymore. This was about actual people, guests, employees, a family who'd been trapped in a broken elevator because money meant to keep them safe had been quietly funneled somewhere else. Julian, I said, I need to know how deep this goes. All the way up. Including Arthur. That's what the next 48 hours are for. The next 2 days moved differently than anything I'd experienced in 11 years at Obsidian Crown. I wasn't inside the building, wasn't in any meeting, wasn't CC'd on a single internal email, and yet I understood, with total clarity, that I was watching a structure collapse from the outside in, one quiet phone call at a time. Carol Whitfield called midday to tell me the board had convened an emergency session. Arthur had requested it himself, apparently trying to get ahead of what he could sense was coming, though he still didn't know the full shape of it. Denise called that evening, exhausted, to say corporate had brought in an outside vendor to manually process a fraction of reservations by hand, at enormous cost, just to keep the Chicago and New York properties functioning. And Piers texted me twice. The first was almost pleading, Val, this is getting out of hand. Whatever you're doing, let's talk. I'll fix whatever needs fixing. The second, 4 hours later, when I hadn't responded, was different. Colder. You think you're clever, but you're an employee. This is still my father's company. Don't forget that. I didn't respond to either one. I screenshotted both and sent them to Carol, who added them, without comment, to a growing folder she'd started calling, half joking, half serious, the file. On the third night, Julian came back to the suite later than usual, and I knew before he said a word that something had changed. He set his laptop bag down carefully, poured himself a glass of water he didn't drink, and sat across from me with the particular stillness of a man choosing exactly how to say something difficult. We got authorization to escalate, he said. The case is moving to formal charges. Wire fraud, tax evasion, falsification of corporate financial records. Pierce is the primary target. But Valerie, Arthur's name is on the escalation list too. Not as a primary suspect yet. As someone under review for what the DOJ is calling willful blindness. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning there's a legal theory that he knew, or should reasonably have known, given his position and access, and chose not to act. Julian rubbed his eyes. It's not the same as active fraud. It's a different kind of liability. But it's not nothing. I thought about Arthur's voice on the phone 3 days earlier, worried, almost fatherly, asking me to fix the system, asking me to trust him one more time. I thought about 11 years of birthday cards signed in his own handwriting, performance bonuses handed to me personally instead of through HR, the framed photo he'd once given me of the two of us at the grand opening of the Miami property, both of us younger, both of us proud of something we'd built together. And then I thought about a 14-month-old email instructing Pierce to keep the renovation budget flexible on paper, and a family trapped in an elevator that corporate quietly wrote off as bad luck. When does this become public? I asked. Soon. Days, not weeks. Once the charges are filed, it's a matter of public record, and reporters who cover corporate fraud move fast. Julian reached across the table and took my hand. Which means you need to decide something before that happens. Do you want back in that building at all? Or do you want out completely, and let this play out from a distance? I looked down at our hands together on the table, then back up at him. I built Vantage, I said. I'm not walking away and letting Pierce Sterling's negligence be the last chapter of something I spent 3 years of my life on. If this company is going to survive what's coming, it's going to survive on my terms. Not his. Not even Arthur's. Julian studied me for a long moment, and something like recognition passed across his face, not surprise exactly. More like confirmation of something he'd already suspected. Then there's something you should think about starting now, he said, before the charges go public and everyone else is scrambling to react instead of plan. What's that? The board is going to need liquidity fast once this breaks. Institutional lenders are going to get nervous the moment fraud investigation and Obsidian Crown appear in the same headline. Stocks going to fall. Banks are going to start calling in loans they'd normally let ride for years. He leaned forward. Someone is going to end up owning pieces of that company for far less than they're worth, Valerie. The only question is whether it's a private equity firm that gets it for parts, or someone who actually understands how to run it. I sat back slowly, the shape of something enormous beginning to form at the edge of my thinking, something I hadn't let myself consider until that exact moment, sitting in a hotel suite 3 days after my own wedding, holding my husband's hand across a table of cold room service. You're talking about me buying the company, I said. I'm talking about you being ready, Julian said, when the opportunity presents itself. Because it's going to. Faster than you think. I didn't sleep much that night either. But for the first time since the wedding, when I finally closed my eyes, it wasn't dread keeping me awake. It was a plan. The story broke on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after my wedding. Obsidian Crown executive charged in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. That was the headline that ran across 3 major financial outlets within the same 6-hour window, each version slightly different but carrying the same core facts. Pierce Sterling, executive director of operations, indicted on charges of wire fraud, falsification of corporate records, and tax evasion tied to over $11 million funneled through offshore shell entities. Arthur Sterling named separately, under a federal review for financial oversight failures, though not formally charged. I watched the news alert light up my phone while sitting in Carol Whitfield's office, a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, and I felt something strange settle over the room, not celebration, not yet. Something quieter. The particular stillness of watching a machine you understood completely finally do exactly what you'd always known it would eventually do. By that afternoon, Obsidian Crown's stock had fallen 34%. By Thursday, 2 of the company's primary institutional lenders had frozen further credit lines pending the outcome of the investigation, citing standard risk clauses buried in loan agreements Arthur had signed years earlier without much concern, back when the company's numbers made everyone comfortable enough not to read the fine print too closely. Denise called me that Friday, her voice raw with exhaustion. Corporate laid off 40 people from the Chicago headquarters this morning, Valerie. Marketing, corporate events, half the finance department. They said it's temporary. Nobody believes that. I didn't say much to her. There wasn't much to say yet. But I wrote her name down in a small notebook I'd started keeping, the beginning of a list I didn't fully understand the purpose of at the time, though I would, within a matter of weeks. Pierce was released on bail the following week, and the terms restricted him from any operational role at Obsidian Crown, effective immediately. Arthur, still technically the majority shareholder, found himself in the strange position of running a company he could no longer meaningfully control, every major decision now requiring sign-off from a board growing increasingly desperate to protect what remained of their investment, and lenders who no longer trusted his signature on anything. I finally submitted the certified handover protocol for Vantage 18 days after the wedding, not to Pierce, not even directly to Arthur, but to a court-appointed financial monitor the DOJ had installed to oversee the company's operations during the investigation. The system came back online within 6 hours. Bookings resumed. Payroll processed on schedule for the first time in nearly 3 weeks. And with that single administrative action, my name became something the board could no longer avoid discussing directly. I did not go back to work for Obsidian Crown. Instead, 3 weeks after the news broke, I registered a new company, Vance Fintech Advisory, a consulting firm specializing in operational infrastructure for distressed hospitality and luxury retail businesses. Julian handled the legal groundwork with a precision that made me understand, for the first time, exactly how good he was at his actual job, not just untangling fraud, but building things clean enough that nobody could later claim impropriety. Word moved fast in an industry that small. Within 2 months, I had 3 other hospitality groups as clients, each of them privately relieved to be working with the woman who'd built the system that made Obsidian Crown profitable in the first place, rather than the family currently drowning in federal headlines. But I never stopped watching Obsidian Crown itself. By month 4, the board had brought in an interim CEO from outside the family, a cost-cutting specialist who slashed staff, deferred maintenance further, and sold off 2 underperforming properties in a panic that only deepened the company's structural problems. By month 6, 3 more institutional lenders had called in their loans. By month 8, the company's total valuation had fallen from an estimated $3.1 billion to just under $600 million, and whispers of bankruptcy protection had started appearing in trade publications. That was when I made my first call to the board directly. Not through Carol. Not through an intermediary. Me on a scheduled call with the 6 remaining board members, speaking to people I'd sat across conference tables from a dozen times over the years, except this time, I wasn't presenting quarterly performance metrics. I was presenting an acquisition offer. I'm not interested in gutting this company, I told them plainly. I'm interested in fixing it. I built the system that made it work once. I know exactly where the inefficiencies are, exactly which properties are salvageable, and exactly what it would take to stabilize the balance sheet within 18 months. What I'm offering isn't charity, and it isn't revenge. It's the only realistic path forward that doesn't end in liquidation. The offer I put on the table, backed by 2 private lending partners Julian had connected me with through the investigation's broader financial network, was $580 million for controlling interest, pennies on the dollar compared to what the company had been worth 14 months earlier, but considerably more than the board would recover in a forced bankruptcy sale, and they knew it. It took 6 weeks of negotiation. It took Arthur Sterling, in a private call I still think about more than almost anything else from that entire year, asking me directly whether I hated him. I don't hate you, Arthur, I told him honestly. I trusted you for 11 years, and I think you genuinely believed you were building something good. But you stopped asking hard questions about your own son a long time, before I ever stopped asking them about my own work. That's not hatred. That's just the truth. He didn't respond to that for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, the board votes next week. I won't fight it. He didn't. Exactly 1 year to the day after my wedding, I walked into the penthouse boardroom at Obsidian Crown's headquarters in Chicago, the same room where Pierce had once corrected me in front of 6 other executives about a pricing model I'd personally designed, the same room where Arthur had once handed me a bonus check with a handshake and a smile that I genuinely believed meant something. I walked in as the sole controlling owner of the company. Arthur was already seated at the far end of the table, older than he'd looked even in photographs from the trial coverage, his hands folded in front of him with the stillness of a man who had run out of moves. Pierce sat beside him, out on bail, his federal sentencing still pending, his expensive suit hanging slightly looser on him than it used to. Neither of them spoke as I sat down across from them and set a single folder on the table. I'm not here to destroy either of you, I said, and I watched something flicker across Pierce's face, the beginning of relief, quickly extinguished by what I said next. But I'm also not here to pretend the last year didn't happen. I slid the folder toward Arthur first. Inside was a consulting agreement, modest, honorary, requiring no daily presence, offering a fraction of his previous compensation in exchange for occasional advisory input on legacy properties he'd built decades earlier, back before any of this. You built something real once, Arthur. Before you stopped paying attention to how it was actually being run. I'm not erasing that. But you don't run anything here anymore. You advise when asked. Nothing more. He looked at the paper for a long time before signing it without a word. Then I turned to Pierce. I set a second item on the table, not a folder this time. A plain gray uniform, folded neatly, with a small embroidered patch reading Facilities, Obsidian Crown, Chicago. Pierce stared at it, then at me, his jaw tightening with the particular humiliation of a man realizing exactly what was about to happen, and having no leverage left to stop it. "You sent me a message on my wedding day," I said, my voice even, without theater in it. "You told me it was a gift." I've thought about that a lot over the last year, what it actually means to give someone something they didn't earn versus something they did. "So here's your gift back. You start on the maintenance floor. Full-time, minimum wage, reporting to a supervisor who's worked here longer than you've been alive. You'll learn how the elevators actually get serviced. You'll learn what the renovation budget is actually supposed to fund. And if you last a year without cutting a single corner, we'll talk about what comes next." "You're joking," Pierce said, though his voice had lost every trace of the arrogance I remembered from that boardroom a year earlier. "I've never been less interested in joking," I said. "You have two choices. You can walk out of here with nothing, and explain to your sentencing hearing that you turned down honest work when it was offered to you. Or you can put on the uniform and actually learn what this company is built on. I don't particularly care which one you choose." He picked up the uniform. I stood, gathered the folder, and left the room without waiting to watch him change into it, not out of cruelty, but because I genuinely didn't need to see it to know I'd made my point. 6 weeks later, a text came through on my phone from a number I'd deleted and re-added more times than I wanted to admit. "Pierce, I'm sorry, boss." I looked at it for a long moment, standing in the lobby of the Chicago property, watching a young front desk associate, someone I'd hired myself, 3 weeks into reopening the position with a fair wage and real benefits, check in a family of 4 without a single system glitch, without a single delay, the whole process running exactly the way it was designed to run when nobody was quietly siphoning the budget meant to keep it working. I typed back 6 words and I meant every one of them. "Make sure you don't fail. Some gifts can't be returned." Then I put my phone away, walked past the front desk, and headed up to the office that used to belong to a man who never once, in 11 years, thought to ask what would happen if the woman keeping his company running finally decided to stop protecting him from the consequences of his own blindness. I didn't walk away from Obsidian Crown that day, and I never did. I rebuilt it.